Hello, my name is Mila. I'm the president of OnPoint Business Solutions. We are a New York City-based firm specializing in tax and accounting for small businesses. The reason I decided to make this video is because a lot of my clients have been approaching me for help filling out the PPP loan applications. As you know, the rules have changed numerous times. I've enlisted the help of my friend, Dr. Ryan Letts, because he's much more of an authority on the subject than I am, and he's going to be helping our clients navigate the confusing and somewhat lengthy process of filling out this application.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Mila. That was fantastic. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your guest today. And I'm happy to lend whatever insights I can into this whole PPP loan forgiveness process for your clients.
It's a pleasure to do this with you, even though it's virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah, these are very perplexing times indeed. In terms of this whole social distancing and the impact that it means for small businesses and what it means in terms of reopening and staying open in a sustainable manner. So yeah, I've been inundated with requests to do PPP loans. Now I'm being inundated with requests to do the PPP loan forgiveness. And it's very timely, and folks really need to get on board with that right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have compiled a set of questions that seem to be coming up over and over again. So I've decided to pick the ones that are the most common, the ones that my clients have been asking me most often. And we are going to go through these questions, and hopefully the viewers will get a benefit of learning from you. And I do want to mention that those who would like to get in touch with Dr. Ryan, please contact me directly. I have the information on our website, or Dr. Ryan, you will provide your contact information as well.
Absolutely.
So one of the first questions that I get is, when is the deadline for the submission of the forgiveness application? Can you clarify, because there's a lot of confusion, can you clarify that for us, for our viewers?
Absolutely. And that is a great question. And I can understand why your audience or your clients may be confused. One reason is due to all of the changes that's been happening on the ground. So our leaders have had to make adjustments, and using the best information that they've had at the point. Now, initially the application deadline was for the end of July. That has been extended until the end of December of 2020. So the 30th of December of 2020 is the deadline to submit your applications for the PPP loan forgiveness. That is the answer to your question.
Very good, very good. Although some people, if they choose to, can do it sooner.
Absolutely. It is,
okay.
And sometimes I believe it's going to be in their best interest to do it sooner, simply because the nature of the PPP is an indefinite program. And it's only for an 8-week period that you're going to get the forgiveness for. So it doesn't matter when you do it, but it's probably better that you do it sooner rather than later, so at least you understand what your financial picture is going to look like.
For sure. You're absolutely right, for sure. What must a business owner do in order to maximize his or her forgiveness amount?
Sure. So it can be confusing, but the simplest answer is to use the loan for the purpose in which it was intended. So if you are using it to pay your employees, if you are using it for qualified expenses such as mortgage or leasehold expenses, if you're paying off any debtors that you may owe, those are the use cases in which the PPP was intended. And as long as you're using it for those, then you should, for all intents and purposes, qualify for the forgiveness.
Okay. Just as a side question,
Sure.
and what happens if you decide to use a chunk of the money for something else? Maybe to do something other than what's designated by the SBA, what the funds were designated for. What happens to those funds?
So while we understand that the situation is nebulous on the ground and always changing, and it's really up to discretion of the business owner what they feel is the most pressing thing for their business. So other than the stated uses, if you're going to use it for something else, one of the defaults that's built into the loan is that it automatically converts into a 1% interest loan. And so whatever the balance that's left over from the forgiveness portion for all of the qualified expenses will be automatically converted into a loan, which is paid back at a 1% interest rate.
So in trying to figure out what portion of the money is really forgivable, it's important that the business owner have a good accounting system, something where they can easily segregate the money that is subject to the loan forgiveness from the money that would not qualify. And I want to stress that point because I have gotten calls from small business owners who did receive the money and have used the money and are still using the money. They have some of it left over, but they don't understand the concept of accounting and they don't seem to think it's important enough. And I want to stress that it is going to come into play. So hopefully this video will alert you to the fact that you better get your finances together so you can clearly demonstrate how you used the funds.
So that's an excellent question, Mila. And if we've learned anything at this particular juncture in the pandemic is that at the beginning, when folks were trying to get their disaster loan assistance, there was a rush on the banks. And to get the supporting documentation that they needed, they had to get in contact with their attorneys. So that,
Right.
I'm sorry,
Accountants.
is,
although some people definitely did use attorneys.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen it all this given pandemic or this past pandemic, where folks were contacting everyone that they knew that had some sort of affiliation with businesses to get some guidance. Hence, all the confusion.
Right.
So I recommend that anyone that is applying for the PPP loan forgiveness, that they have their documentation in order, that they do stress and make an effort to get a good accounting system in place. If for nothing else, this has presented an opportunity for us to reset in a lot of ways. It's just to kind of take stock of where we are, where we'd like to go, and reformulate our plan to actually get there. So I agree that having the proper provisions and systems in place, especially with accounting, is going to be key to making sure that you have the supporting documentation that you need for the loan forgiveness.
Right. Thank you for that. So what does happen when you've got the funds and you intend to use it for payroll, but you can't get the people to come back?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And that's going to present a real scenario for folks, especially when September rolls around, because there's extenuating circumstances. One, you have to look at the schooling situation. So this is on a regional basis where the governors and mayors of the states are making the determination on their own. So that's going to impact a lot of employees, especially if you have to commute across borders. So if you live in a tri-state and you commute, that's going to impact you. If you're further out, that's also going to impact you. So that's going to present a hard challenge for employers simply because, one, you can't mandate that your employees come back to work, especially if it's not a safe environment. And secondly, if you as the employer are in a position to reopen, yet don't have the wherewithal in terms of the manpower to reopen, then you have to document that. You have to demonstrate that you've done everything within your powers to adhere to the guidelines of the rules, and then a decision will be made. So if you're demonstrating that through good faith effort that you made every attempt to get your employees back, then obviously provisions are going to have to be made for that employer. Uh, and to be honest with you, I don't necessarily know that there is a answer that's going to satisfy all of your clients or your audience, but that's simply the reality that we're in. And employees do have that choice. I mean, as a parent, you don't want to put your children in a situation where they're going to be in danger. And then if you send your children to school and they bring home something, that presents a real challenge because now your entire family is knocked out. So it's a very touching situation on either end, and it really needs to be handled with care. But from an employer's perspective, you really have to simply document everything that you're doing.
This is another question that I've gotten. I think it's probably simpler to answer. So what does happen if someone overestimated their payroll or made a mistake when they originally filled out the application and ended up getting more money? How do you correct it, or what happens in this situation?
In this situation, honesty is always the best policy. And I always say that it just makes your life so much simpler. So in that instance, um, what you should do is you should hang on to that funds and earmark that and keep that set aside in the event that you do get audited. But in the event that that should happen, you should always reach out to your lender and reach out to the SBA and make them aware of the situation and work on a means of rectifying the situation.
One of the interesting things I've found in my research with this PPP application as well as the forgiveness is that the IRS is training their auditors for a new set of audit procedures, and these are going to be specialized and designated for PPP loans. So it is important that if you did find that you made a mistake, that you immediately report it or rectify it, because if it does get picked up during an audit, there will be consequences. Very simple, but definitely worth keeping in mind.
Absolutely, and that's a great nugget there for your clients. And you know, as a reason like that, why someone should reach out to an accountant because you're actually taking their best interest in mind. You know,
Right.
a lot of times accountants will try to save their clients money, and I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you need someone that's ethical, and I think that's what you represent. And I'm glad that you're actually giving this information to your clients.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement. So this is another question that I've received, and it's an interesting one because despite the fact that COVID has brought so much devastation to businesses, some businesses have actually thrived. And in our practice, a lot of our clients receive the funds from the SBA, but not all those clients have had a decrease in income. So the question that I've been asked is, can a business that hasn't experienced a decline in sales still justify keeping the loan amount? Ryan?
That's a very good question. And one of the reasons why the small businesses are of such concern is because of their access or lack thereof to capital. Other more sophisticated businesses have other means of raising capital. So if those businesses have not exhausted those other means, then it's not fair for them to take the funds and use it when they have other alternatives to get funding. And I feel like if a company, or my advice to a company that did receive funding, I think that they should do the honest thing and return those funding, especially if they don't need it. If there's a legitimate need, by all means, use it and document it. However, if your situation was that you did not have a decrease as stipulated by the program, then you really are not entitled to that fund. And there are plenty of small businesses out there that do need that funding that
Absolutely.
did not get access to it. So,
That's true.
and so from the receiver's perspective, while it wasn't their fault that they did receive the loan, them hanging on to it is actually being a detriment to other in need businesses. So the moral thing to do is actually to give the money back.
So the thing that you would recommend is to just refund the SBA as timely as possible and not necessarily wait until December 31st.
Absolutely. Or at least
Okay.
make an attempt to contact them, have a record of that, so that if it does come to the point where you are being audited, at least you have some documentation showing that you did make an attempt to contact.
Can you explain the $2 million threshold for the PPP loan if the business sales have not suffered a drastic reduction in sales? Can you give us more insight about this $2 million threshold?
So there, to answer your question about the $2 million threshold. So initially, that was the consensus that was going to be the cap for small businesses. As we got further into the pandemic and we got more information, they realized that one, the funding that was provided was not sufficient to support all of the businesses. So adjustments had to be made, and the cap was then lowered. So now, it, according to the IRS and the SBA, which use sort of like the same guidelines in terms of the definition of a small business, which is either 5 million in revenue or 500 employees. A lot of times, depending on the nature of the business, that gets skewed a bit. So with the $2 million threshold, that's in a normal world, that should be sufficient, right? Especially for a 3-month period, depending on the size of your company. But if you have a larger company or larger overheads, or there were expenses that were due right around the same time that the pandemic happened, that could skew your numbers in several ways.
Okay. Getting back to, just to expand on the previous question, how will the IRS determine whether your sales have actually been impacted? Is it going to compare 2018 period against 2019?
Okay.
Or is it going to compare the first quarter to the second quarter prior to the quarantine? Where is going to be the starting point?
So that's a very good question. And at a very high level, based on the nature of your business, typically what they do is the look back. So what they do is they compare the same period last year versus this period this year, and compare to see which year you made more money. So technically, you should have made more money in 2019 than the same period in 2020 due to everything that's happening. So if you demonstrate that you do have a loss, you have a loss that's contributed to the economy or the pandemic. So that's how the SBA and your lender is going to look at your loan to determine whether or not you have a decrease in sale for the same period. Now, like I said, there may be mitigating circumstances depending on your industry. Some industries have shorter sales cycle, while others have longer sales cycles. And so when you factor those things in, a lot of times sales that were supposed to hit your books in 1 month, they
Right.
don't hit it for another month, and that can impact and cause shifts in your numbers.
Another really important question, and it kind of goes back to the whole accounting, is what are the business owners going to need? What kind of paperwork are they going to have to show as substantiation for the loan forgiveness?
Okay. Thank you. That's a great question. So, one, you want to show your payroll, that you want to demonstrate that you actually did use the funds as they were intended. So, if you have a payroll processor, or if you made payments to your employees, if you cut them checks, then that's a way to demonstrate that you actually made those payments and use the funds as they were intended. Now, there is a caveat because it depends on the structure of your company. If you are an owner of your company and you do drawdowns as opposed to a regular paycheck, then you do not qualify for the PPP. So if you are the first employee of your company and you do get a regular paycheck as opposed to getting paid from the profits, then you have the documentation to demonstrate that you are an employee of the company and you were impacted, and you indeed qualify for the PPP loan.
One of the questions that I get a lot, and this is a question common to small business owners, is, well, I don't need to keep receipts because I just use my credit card and that should be enough of a substantiation. Or, well, I've used my debit card. You can see all the charges on my debit card. Would that be sufficient?
In light of everything that's happening, we've had to resort to some unconventional means of providing supporting documentation. And so those can work. I would prefer to have something that is from a professional, something like an accountant, where these entries are logged in and they're earmarked or annotated, so there isn't any question. And that's what you're trying to avoid, is the questionability of what these payments or distributions were used for. So if you have a means of demonstrating that, then you're in a much better position.
Mhm. And do you feel that when the substantiation phase of the forgiveness will take place, accounting records will be sufficient, or do you feel that the business owner will also have to show the receipts?
So it all depends. When we go through the documentation, we always try to provide the requested documentation. In the event that we have to provide alternative documentation,
Oh, I
that's
see.
when we may use something like that, because
I see.
each company or each business has a unique, or their nuances that comes along with them. And so each nuance has to be accounted for and documented and demonstrated that we've done the due diligence to provide or exhausted all of our efforts to actually provide the documentation as requested.
Understood. Understood. And it's a similar thing that happens during audits, whether they are sales tax audits or income tax audits. So I take from this conversation that substantiation of real paperwork like receipts is really important, but in the absence of such, we can use the accounting records.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the viewers and our clients. And I would like to encourage those that have more questions to get in touch directly with Dr. Ryan. You can contact me for his contact information, or you can reach out to him directly. And please, Dr. Ryan, offer our viewers your contact information.
Thank you so much for that, Mila. Yes, so you can reach me on my website, which is cleonmaye.com, which is CLEONMAYE.com, or you can reach me via telephone, which is 646-886-5382. Again, that's 646-886-5382. If you go to our website, you can schedule an appointment, and I'll be happy to take your calls, and I'm happy to help you out.
And thank you so much for helping me with this, because this is definitely an area that I'm happy to unload to somebody else. So thank you, and we'll speak soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And I always have a great time when we talk. So, and I'm happy to help out any of your clients.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.